Well, good morning, welcome to everybody's channel. Today's transmission will be in English. It will be a short description about the biography of some popes. Specifically, we're going to talk about Pope Mark and Pope Julius, whom we hear very little about, but it is important to know what, so as to avoid many false interpretations by many groups out there. We need to know the history of the Church of our Lord. Because of this, we're going to look at the lives of these popes. Those who want to see this in Spanish, may look at the link down below. La transmisión hoy será en inglés, pero los que quieran escucharla en español, aquí está el enlace para este mismo contenido en español. Now, having said this, all right, we hear a lot of people who have attacked the church with several misconceptions that we need to fix and correct. Because of this, today we're going to have a discussion of the lives of two popes, Pope Mark and Pope Julius. Without further ado, let's begin. Okay, we see, for example, that Pope Mark was the 18th Pope of the Catholic Church, and he ruled the church in the year 336. He got very, very sick, so he died just a few months after he was elected Pope. However, the things he was able to do, he established a constitution that created the diocese of Ostia in Italy, and for a short time, that diocese was even invested with the power to consecrate newly elected popes. That is until the conclaves were reformed a few years later. Furthermore, Mark also started building what was known as the Basilica of San Marco. You see, Pope Mark was a very devout follower of Saint Mark the Evangelist. You might know that one of the Gospels is the Gospel of Mark, and curiously, the Gospel of Mark was also the favorite of Pope Mark's rendering of the Gospels. Probably because of the connection to the name, who knows? And because of his devotion to the evangelist John, who had been 300 years earlier the first bishop of Alexandria, he consecrated a church to the evangelist Saint Mark, and he named it Basilica di San Marco in Rome. And this was done right over the catacombs. You will remember that just a few decades before, Mark was elevated to the papacy, just not even in half a century earlier. The church had been persecuted, and the faithful met inside the catacombs to hold the mass, protected from the assaults of the Roman Empire, which wanted to eliminate Roman Catholicism. So the faithful, during the persecutions of Diocletian, they met in the catacombs. Once Constantine legalized Christianity, the churches were no longer underground. They were now building houses of worship. One of these houses of worship was the Basilica of St. Mark, which was built right on top of the catacomb of Albina, where they had been hiding just half a century earlier. Because of this, Constantine had donated certain lands for cemetery to the church. I know a lot of people doubt this, but the reason why it is doubted by some. It's because of motivation. If there is something you do not want to believe, it is easy to refute it and to deny it rather than to face the truth and accept when you are wrong. So a lot of people who do not want to accept the history behind Constantine um, donating lands to the church will deny this. But interestingly enough, these very same people who deny that are the first ones to make up the lie about Constantine supposedly establishing um, Catholicism, but that's another story. Now, Pope Mark died in October of 1048, and his remains are were put to rest in the Valley 3 and then moved back to Rome under the same Basilica of San Marco, right under the altar. So if one wanted to see where Pope Mark is buried, you would just go to the Basilica di San Marco, and right beneath that altar there, that's where the remains of Pope Mark are buried. When he died, Pope Julius gets elected to be the 19th Pope of the Catholic Church, and he ruled from 337 through 352. Now, Pope Mark went through Pope Julius went through a very, very controversial period. You see, 12 years before his rise to power, Arius of Alexandria, a heretic who denied the divinity of Jesus Christ, had been excommunicated. However, when Pope Alexander died in the year 336, right before Pope Mark had been elevated, so Mark dies in 337, and Constantine dies in 339. After Pope Sylvester dies, you have Pope Marcus, who we just spoke about, and then we have Pope Julius. But also, when Emperor Constantine dies around the year 339 as well. So when that happens, his empire gets split up between his three children, who unfortunately they were more inclined to believe Arianism instead of Catholicism. And then the three sons of Constantine, Constance, Constantius the second, Constantine the second, all three of them, well, two of the three decided to persecute the church and try to exterminate Catholicism from the face of the earth. And part of what the children of Constantine did when they inherited the empire out in the east, they started persecuting Catholicism, and they forcibly removed the real patriarchs and bishops in the realms of the Eastern Roman Empire, and they replaced it with Arian bishops. For example, I think Saint Athanasius was removed because Athanasius was a firm believer of authentic Catholicism, and he was replaced by other patriarchs in Alexandria. The same had happened in Antioch as well as in Constantinople. Well, when Saint Athanasius was removed from the patriarchy of Alexandria, Saint Athanasius, recognizing the superiority of the church in Rome, goes forth to Rome to try and appeal. So Pope Julius declares Arius as the one and only authentic and real patriarch of Alexandria. However, the Roman emperors, Alexander, Constantius, Constantine, and Constance refused to recognize Saint Athanasius. So what they ended up doing, they ended up naming their own favorite people. So we see that the church in the East starts deviating from the truth, because now these churches in the East are deciding more because of power now. They're not interested in the truth anymore. Now they just want to be, what's the word I'm looking for? They want to be subservient to the Arian heresy. Arianism, by the way, it was a belief that Jesus Christ was a regular human being and not God. So the popes, not the popes, the emperors in the East refused to recognize the divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. And what did they do? They started imposing bishops who denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. And they started preaching that Jesus Christ was supposedly not God, and they started killing off anybody who dared proclaim that Jesus Christ is God. So among those who preached the divinity of Christ was Athanasius, who went through 4 different exiles. The first exile, during the first 2 exiles, he had gone to Rome. During the second exile, which happened around 341, happens when the Emperor Constantius II names Eusebius of Nicomedia an Arian cleric, and elevates him to become the Patriarch of Constantinople. This showing us then that Eusebius of Nicomedia was not a real bishop. He was elevated as patriarch by Constantine's son, Constantius II. And by doing this, he deposes or removes from power Saint Athanasius, who once again he goes back to Rome to ask the Pope to help him out. So the Pope summons a Council of Antioch in the year 341. They meet up in Antioch, but other people who were named by Constantius II to be patriarchs and bishops refused to show up to the council. So ultimately, only members of the Catholic Church ended up attending to the Council of Antioch, which once again refuted and declared as heretical the teachings of Arius of Alexandria, and Eusebius of Nicomedia, being a follower of the same lies of Arius of Alexandria, he too was declared that he is not an authentic patriarch for the church. So, but the problem was that these false bishops, such as the Arian bishop of Nicomedia, now Patriarch of Constantinople, Eusebius of Nicomedia, were protected, and they held the favor of the heretical Byzantine emperors. Now, therefore, Pope Ignatius sends a letter to these bishops who refused to attend, telling them that they do not have that neither the emperor nor the bishops have the right to remove Athanasius from the power. That they had to speak to the Pope before they could remove Athanasius. And here in his own writing, he writes these words: "Can you be so ignorant that this is a custom that we should be written to first, so that from here what is just may be defined. In other words, Pope Julius wrote in his letter that no patriarch can be removed without the Pope authorizing it first. But the Roman emperors did not agree with this, so they neglected all that and continued imposing their own bishops as they saw fit in the East. That was one of the things that started by making the difference between Catholicism and the Orthodox Church. That's one of the things that started making that the Orthodox Church step further and further and further away from the church, from the truth. Now, another thing that is credited to Pope Julius is the date for Christmas. It is claimed by many that supposedly Pope Julius had determined that the date to celebrate Christmas would be December 25th. The reason, and many of them say that the reasons why was because the Roman pagans celebrated Saturnalia during that time, and the church wanted to preach the gospel and get people to forget about the pagan practices of Saturnalia. Other people claim that the reason why Julius supposedly named Christmas for December 25th was connected to the festivity of Solis Invictus, the invincible sun, and Pope Julius was trying to get us to focus more in worshiping Jesus Christ and not the sun. But because of this, there's a controversy, even within Catholics, but as to whether December 25th was the real date of the birth of Christ. But the main consensus is that the church celebrates it on that day, not because they're celebrating the day, but because Catholicism is celebrating the concept of incarnation, not precisely on that date. But according to Stephen Hillman's and his book, Temples and Priests of Sol in the City of Rome, written in 2010, there is no evidence at all that Pope Julius had established that date. Quite the opposite, we have St. Hippolytus already celebrating Christmas on December 25th, 100 years before Julius was even brought to the papacy. My inclination is that if we look at the details of the first chapter of Luke, it places Zechariah's vision of the angel around the Feast of Tabernacles, which turns out to be in October. And if we calculate then from that point on, the 9 months of Elizabeth plus the time of Mary's pregnancy, we do come to the point of Christ being born in or around December of the following year after Zechariah sees the angel. Now, moving on, Pope Mark dies in the year 352. We will continue with the remaining papal biographies some other time. But for right now, remember, today, as always, long live Christ the King!